What is racism, and can a black person be a racist? Racism is a group-based power and economic control phenomenon in which one racial group owns and controls so much wealth and resource power that it can enslave, subordinate, exploit, exclude, or render another group non-competitive. The dominant racial group can make life and death decisions for potential competitor groups. It can predetermine what the lesser powered group can own, control, its wealth, and the extent to which it will be allowed to compete. Racism is one of the most contentious and dangerous terms in the English lexicon and is overused and misapplied by laymen and scholars alike. In a society in which the policy of benign neglect is still operative against blacks, there has been an effort to equate and replace racism with classism. Class is defined by economic status, educational level, and employment status, and professional accomplishment. Class is fluid. Racism against blacks is fixed. Classism and racism are not the same. Blacks, as a group, cannot cross the color or race line. Religious, gender, ethnic, or cultural groups are not the victims of racism, but of classism. The power and economic control phenomenon of racism is non-applicable to them because classes are subcategories of the larger society, and generally, they participated in the economic enrichment from black enslavement. Further, classes are open and fluid and promote the right to compete for equality. Racism came into existence on the eve of the Civil War, after all the resources had been distributed to European whites. The practice of racism was originally designed to deny blacks the right to compete, to be equal, and to become a class. While racism is group-based, class discrimination is individualized and arises from prevailing societal issues. For instance, when Arabs are profiled and connected to terrorism, it is discrimination, but it is not racism. When Hispanics are profiled and associated with illegal immigration, it is not racism, but discrimination arising out of contemporary social concerns. In neither of the recited instances is the purpose of the class discrimination to exploit, enslave, or segregate all members of the classes. It is inaccurate to equate class minorities to blacks and racism. History reveals that the concept of racism has undergone a metamorphosis in both meaning and application through the centuries. To understand racism and deal with it effectively, it is important to understand the historical origin and purpose of racism, to know what it is and what it is not. Racism, as a word and concept, did not just pop up out of the blue. It evolved from a confluence of events and circumstances. The practice of equating individualized gender, ethnic, cultural, and religious discrimination to institutionalize racism against black people provides justification for continuing the racial status quo. In the late 1400s, two essential factors came together from which racism evolved: the possibility of free land in the Americas and free labor from African blacks. At that time, the entire continent of Europe was dysfunctional, ravaged by famine, crime, poverty, and disease. European countries were looking for lands to conquer, to infuse their nations with new energy and wealth. The Catholic Church was the leading invader and controller of world expansionism. During that period, the Vatican was given 16 black slaves as a gift. A short time later, Pope Innocent issued a special edict and declared that blacks should be used as free labor, thereby establishing a new kind of slavery. Until that time, a person could be enslaved for only 3 reasons: religious persecution, personal indebtedness, or for being a prisoner of war. When Columbus returned to Europe with news that he had discovered a new, uninhabited land, a vision took hold to merge available free black labor with new free land, Europe at the time. At that precise point, racism replaced tribalism. The social structure of 9 European nations went into competition. A politico-economic race commenced to see which country could best exploit free black labor and use it to capture land, resources, and wealth to enrich their countries. That economic race, using free black labor, lasted until the eve of the 1861 Civil War in the U.S. The race between the European nations ended at this point because the resources and wealth of the Americas had been distributed, and nearly 100% of everything was now in the hands of white Europeans. At the same time, European slaveholders denied enslaved blacks the right not only to enjoy the fruits of their labor, but also the right to acquire land, wealth, and political power. These exclusions were instituted as law, and blacks were defined as powerless property. The founding fathers rigged the race. They crafted a social construct that locked blacks into a constitutional underclass status, and white society as a group remains opposed to corrective redistribution of wealth, power, or resources to black Americans. After all the resources had been distributed to whites by the 1862nd, the concept of racism morphed from an economic issue to one of biology, with Charles Darwin's theory of natural selection presented in his 1859 book, Origin of the Species. In this book, he ranked living organisms and classified blacks at the bottom of human species. Out of Darwin's biological theories grew the requirement that all persons be identified by racial designations on birth certificates, driver licenses, and other public documents. Race remained a biological issue until a century later, with the advent of the Black Civil Rights Movement, when racism morphed again. The concept of racism expanded and took on a more colloquial and casual meaning that signified not power, but personal feelings about liking or disliking individuals. This misdirection and misapplication of the term racism allowed the original objective of racism to maintain the inequality between whites and blacks to continue unabated. Racism grew out of the competitive race between groups to control wealth and power. As early as 1,516 inches North America, whites have been the winners and blacks the losers, allowed only to react to white racism. Blacks do not have power or wealth. It is therefore not possible for them to be racist.